Hi there, this is David, and today we're going to be looking at 4 classic series where the developers kind of went hog wild and decided that they knew better than the fans themselves. They took a successful formula and just ruined it in the sequel. They went so far as to just completely lose the spirit of what made the original game so successful in the first place. The first 4 games that we're going to be looking at will have changed for the worse, but for the 5th game, I went the other way. We're going to look at a game which kind of sucked at first, but the developers definitely changed it for the better in the sequel. So, let's get started. Number 1. Final Fantasy to Final Fantasy II, both released for the NES. I played the original Final Fantasy on the NES when it first came out when I was 8 years old, and the game set the standard for what I want in my RPGs, with its full open-world map, secrets, diversions, and optional destinations. The dungeons themselves were not just straight paths either. Even the simplest of them have treasure scattered all around, with many different paths and corridors to traverse through. So not only did the developers intend for you to play through multiple times to find all the treasures, they took it a step further with all the job classes to choose from to formulate your party as well. The replayability is through the roof, and I think that's why it really stood the test of time to this day. Unlike its sequel, Final Fantasy II took everything that made the first game so special and turned it all on its head. It's actually kind of a study in contradictions. While the world is ripe for exploration from the get-go, you can't move the story forward without the proper passwords, so you still kinda have to go in order. And while you can't choose your classes right from the start, you can mold your characters to your liking depending on what weapons and magics that you use in combat. As a further slap in the face, you're actually punished for exploring dungeons, as there are many rooms to nowhere found in the multiple dead ends. If you're unfortunate to go into one, not only will you find no treasure whatsoever, you'll be hit with a ridiculous encounter rate. Thankfully, Square decided to spin off the Saga series based off the growth system here, and they reverted back to the original ideas for future sequels. Number 2. Breath of Fire 4 to Breath of Fire 5, released for the PlayStation and then the PlayStation 2. This one broke my heart. From the first time I played Breath of Fire when I was 12 years old, I fell in love with the series. They were all quality titles, culminating with Breath of Fire 4, one of my absolute favorites in the entire franchise. At its core, the games are a coming-of-age adventure between the reincarnations of Ryu and Nina, set in a world of animalistic inhabitants. The hallmarks for the series include fantastical backdrops, imaginative characters, and absolutely gorgeous, bright, cheery graphics, along with sumptuous music that really draws you in and makes you feel like you're on an adventure. Large, multiple-person parties, along with Ryu's dragon transformations, are simply staples in the epic wars between the light and dark dragons. Breath of Fire 5 Dragon Quarter was just so different from the rest, and even though I enjoyed the game, I still do wish that they renamed it and made it its own IP. It's just not a Breath of Fire game, and it really was the kiss of death for the series. Gone are the bright graphics and adventurous music. Gone are multiple races, a sprawling world map, and even the turn-based combat. Dragon Quarter is much more of a dungeon crawler with tactical turn-based combat, complete with enemy movement, combos, and traps. Taken on its own with no prior knowledge of the series, it's actually very fun. And no matter how good I think it is, I will never forgive it for burying one of my favorite RPGs into the ground. Number 3. Alundra to Alundra II, both released for the PlayStation. Back in high school, I read that Alundra was a fantastic game, but the sequel, not so much. So I asked for the first game for Christmas, but instead what I got was Alundra 2. While I was disappointed, I didn't say anything because I didn't want to seem bratty or ungrateful, but the very next day, I went out to Target and I bought myself a copy of Alundra, and then I spent the rest of that Christmas break playing and enjoying both games. Though I do agree that they changed far too much between them because they are a series in name only. The only things that they really share are their ridiculous difficulty, notorious puzzles, and Zelda-like gameplay. The first stars Alundra as he's shipwrecked on a cursed island, and he has to take whimsical romps through dreams in order to break their curse. The music is fantastic, and the 2D graphics are completely gorgeous. the sepia-toned color scheme is also really fitting. The sequel, while retaining the core puzzle and action-adventure gameplay, is another beast entirely. The graphics are colorful, even borderline jarring, and while voice acting was added, it's not exactly the best that I've ever heard. There are no references to the past game whatsoever, and the story is completely different. It's no longer a serious journey. It's now a tongue-in-cheek adventure story of a wanted pirate hunter, Flint, who gets caught up in the antics of a ridiculous pirate family who killed his parents. I truly feel that Alundra could have been Sony's answer to Zelda, but by changing it up so much and egregiously making the entire thing 3D, as well as filling it chock full with loading screens, they shot themselves in the foot, and the series ended. Number 4. Actrazer to Actrazer II, both released for the SNES. Of the various series that we've seen here, I find this one to be the most egregious. Back in the day, Enix was known for the Dragon Quest series as well as their off-kilter and strange RPGs like Actrazer. Think Populous meets Soul Blazer meets King of Dragons, and you've got Actrazer. You're a master, a kind of angel who has to help the people of the land through an overworld sim game where you control the weather, defeat monster dens, and do your best to make the people worship you. While it's basic, it's pretty fun to literally play God with your underlings. After you finish the sim portion, you're then going into a more traditional side-scrolling action portion where you fight enemies and ultimately defeat a boss. It's a ton of fun and a relaxing jaunt. The sequel, on the other hand, is anything but relaxing. The developers in all their wisdom decided that the players hated the sim portion, so they removed that entirely, and instead made it all action all the time. You also get all your powers and magic at the very beginning of the game too, so it's not like there were special items strewn about to find in the various stages. You don't even gain levels, gold, or more health for beating them. It's just straight up combat that never changes from the beginning to the end. To make matters worse though, the difficulty has been ramped up to a ridiculous level. There are literally hordes of monsters chasing after you on every single screen. It is nerve-wracking. They took everything that made the first game great and ripped it all away for some generic Final Fight rip-off side-scroller. Number 5. Luffia to Luffia II, both released for the SNES. So far, we've seen 4 examples of games that changed for the worse with their sequels, but now it's time for an example of an exponentially good change. A change so good that it took a banal Dragon Quest clone and elevated it to legendary cult status. Luffia and the Fortress of Doom is the epitome of basic town, dungeon, town RPG with a little story thrown in for good measure. I mean, it doesn't even have auto-targeting if the enemy dies. The dungeons are the antithesis of fun. They're filled to the brim with dead ends and tons of backtracking. Really, the only reason to play this nowadays is to see how the Luffia series began, discover the namesake of the franchise, and explore the middle entry in the Doom Island trilogy. Luffia II, Rise of the Sinistrals, is actually a prequel to the original game, and is such a step up in every single way that it just can't be understated. The characters now actually have a personality, and the storyline is gripping. You now want to get to the next town to see what's going to happen. The dungeons, rather than being an exercise in drudgery, are now the best part. Each is filled to the brim with puzzles, but thankfully, they're not too devious as to be a roadblock, but they do make you stop and think. The treasures hidden within the dungeons do reward your perseverance, as the items don't just raise your stats, they impart IP abilities, which work kind of like limit breaks. In battle, when you're damaged, your IP gauge increases, and then you'll be able to use your equipment's IP attacks for unique options. The entire adventure is fantastic, and it went on to single-handedly spawn the rest of the fantastic franchise. Well, that's it for my overview of 5 classic series where the developers changed too much. If you like this video and what I do here on the channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon for early access and exclusive content. The link to it can be found in the video description. This has been David. If you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good day.